This podcast is proudly brought to you by www.maximusmark.com and Enterprise Fitness. For more great podcasts just like this one, check out www.maximusmark.com/radio, where you can find more great podcasts just like this one, or search Maximus Mark on iTunes. Hey folks, it's Maximus Mark, and welcome to the show that punches you in the face with information, but in a good way. It's Maximus Mark Radio. And today we're talking all about women's issues, from PCOS to menopause and PMS. Today's guest is the author of Lights Out and the book Sex, Lies and Menopause, and I believe she has another upcoming book called Anthropology. She has created her own very unique method of supporting women with menopause called the Wiley Protocol, which you can check out at www.thewileyprotocol.com. And I have to say, the first time I heard TS speak, she challenged the way I thought about a lot of issues. TS has a lot to say on the topic of women's health, and it is a pleasure that I welcome TS Wiley to the show. So, with that said, let's welcome TS. Welcome to the show, TS. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on. The theme for today and what we're talking about, as I've already told the listeners and the readers, that you've written 3 books now: Lights Out, Sex, Lies and Menopause, and Anthropology. We want to. I guess the theme we're going for is the Women's Issues Show. So we're talking about menstruation, PMS and PCOS. But I guess the first place where we really should start is, how did you get into the field of teaching endocrinology?
Well, I, like any other woman with my own uterus, had problems after I had 5 children. My youngest was 3 years old, and I realized I had an ovarian cyst, and my periods were shorter, and I had a fibroid, and I had a breast lump. And I got tired of waking up every morning scared because I had little kids. And I thought, I bet I can figure this out. And I had taken my daughter to an endocrinologist who dealt with her migraines, and that woman and I had written a book called Lights Out, Sleep, Sugar, and Survival, about sleeping in 2 diabetes, and I decided I would write what I had learned about menopause. So Sex, Lies, and Menopause happened. Those were all the questions I had, and how I would solve my problems, going through history and the events as they unfolded for women over the last 150 years. And then I realized that I could write this down, but women couldn't necessarily get their hands on it. So I started working at compounding pharmacies, trying to figure out what was missing, and what was missing was standardization. In other words, we couldn't run studies because every pharmacy made anything they want, said anything they want, charged anything they want. So I got into compounding and pharmacy, and then I realized the doctors could not wrap their minds around doing hormones that weren't being prescribed like antibiotics, like 1 or 2 a day. So what I did was start to teach in a planetarium in Glendale, California, and the doctors would come. I wrote an hour planetarium show and then stay for 2 days. And in those 2 days, they got 17 hours of continuing medical education credit, and they got a new perspective on how the world works and how everyone fits in it, particularly women. Wow. So that's what happened.
So how many years, I guess, was that journey?
About 15.
15, wow.
I was 43 when I started having my own health problems, and I'm 60 now.
Right.
So it was a long time.
All righty. So I guess let's set the scene first. I mean, let's start with the very, very essence. What is menopause?
Well, menopause is a result of having lived too long and eaten too much. What happens is you are on a planet that's spinning 1,000 miles an hour under your feet, chasing the sun another 67,000 miles an hour through the sky. And all of those cycles matter. And you come into this world with enough hormones, and neurotransmitters, dopamine, insulin, cortisol, whatever, for so many days and so many nights. And the time is kicked off by your adrenal glands. And when you hit about I don't know, depends on where you live. At the turn of the century, women started to menstruate at 17. Now they start to menstruate at 8 or 10 years old. And that's because false light, artificial light, and all the carbohydrates out there mean that instead of having one summer of long light and high carbohydrate, available every trip around the sun, we have 4. So people are aging 4 times as fast. Well, that aging process controlled by the mainspring in you, the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, is marking off time. And you hit a certain point and it's time to reproduce. Now, you can get to that point faster if you seem to pass more years than you really do chronologically. Inside, you're older. So now that we've got girls at 8 or 10 having, periods and reproducing, we get to menopause much faster because we use up eggs faster. I mean, I grew up on a farm in Illinois, and we knew that if you left the lights on in the chicken coop at night, you get more eggs. Wow. And that's what happens to women. They age faster with the lights on because it's like more days are passing.
So I guess everyone talks about insulin being the aging hormone. I mean, how big a part does something like the hormone insulin have to play?
Well, insulin only happens when there's blood sugar. And there's only blood sugar if cortisol is up or you eat. You can eat yourself to death, but more importantly, when you don't go to bed at night, when it's dark, your cortisol stays on because the lights are on, mobilizing blood sugar. And insulin always follows to disperse it. Well, if insulin is around too long, you become insulin resistant in your arms and legs, and you get fat around the middle. But more importantly, it's a timer. It's saying how many summers have gone by. And if it's up all year long, that's 4 summers. So you're aging in fast forward.
Right. So I know it's multifaceted, but do you think it's I guess between insulin and cortisol, do you think they're, I guess, really the main 2 things at play there?
Well, they're the ones that are counting off the time, food and light. Cortisol relates to the light, melatonin relates to the dark, and insulin, of course, relates to food supply. So they are the main clocking mechanisms to get you to reproduction.
Right. Okay.
And to end reproduction.
Yeah. So I guess in natural medicine, there is a bit of talk about, I guess, preventing menopause, or I guess, so should I say, can the symptoms of menopause be avoided?
I think so. I mean, what I did was figure out how to use bioidentical hormones made out of yams in creams and dose them in a way that escalated and descended the curves that a young woman would have at age 20. So that we had a peak on day 12, and we had a peak on day 21. And when we were able to do that and restore a normal menstrual period, assuming you have a uterus, you never hit menopause. You have those hormones the way you had them in your 20s and 30s forever.
Right. So realistically, is someone going on, I guess, the Wiley protocol and starting, let's say, in their 50s, do you have a predicted of how long they can live, I guess, with the improved quality of life?
Well, you got to remember, I didn't do this for longevity.
Yeah.
I'm not one of those anti-aging people. My premise was quality of life, that every day above ground should be a good one.
Right.
So I just was hoping to make people comfortable. But it turns out that they're more than comfortable. They're healthy again. Yeah. Their hearts are better. We have run cancer trials, and we see not only no harm, it could be potentially preventative. Because, people get cancer at midlife when their hormones are falling off. Yeah. So if you're going to put them back, and you're going to put them back right, you logically have a better chance of avoiding overgrowth. Cancer is not about too much growth, it's about not enough death. Right. And progesterone in every part of every cycle causes something called apoptosis, which is cell suicide. And then those organs remake themselves in the normal template instead of getting tumors or being bizarre.
So you have found, I guess, a crossover between the anti-aging and the Wiley protocol?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that longevity will be a nasty side effect. Maybe everybody will live forever, but more importantly, they'll live well.
Yeah.
And, there's no guarantees. You can step off the curb and get hit by a bus. It just should be a good day. And as you age, the good days are farther and farther between. You wake up and you hurt all over. Or you couldn't sleep all night. Or you don't know where your car keys are. Or, living like that alone is miserable.
So I know it's the female issue show, but I do want to just go off on this tangent just for a second. But could you say the same is true for men? Obviously, as men age, their testosterone drops off. But when you talk about giving testosterone to a 50 or 60-year-old man, it's always seen as, no, you shouldn't do that. But that would, in a sense, as well, increase the quality of their life into their 20s. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, we have to look at the statistics. Young men don't get prostate cancer, and old men do. And again, if you were going to give a man hormones, and there's a million reasons why, it lowers their blood pressure, it strengthens their heart, it makes more muscles to take up the blood sugar, the glucose, so diabetes is less possible. They sleep better, they have better moods. All of that is certainly true. So, yeah, you would give men hormones just the way you give them to women, hoping for quality of life.
Now,
better bones.
Sorry, continue.
I said better bones.
Yeah.
Everything gets better.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know with the Wiley protocol that you dose it in relation to moon cycles. Is that right? Or
yes, for women we do.
Yeah.
The women are on a lunar cycle, and they. If they have no uterus, if they have no period, they go on to a lunar cycle. Right. And day 12 is always the full moon. However, if they're still having their own cycles, we start on their own day 1. Now, a man, if he has a female partner, will cycle with her for the pheromonal exchange. And if it's a same-sex relationship, they would be on the lunar cycle. So... Or if he's alone, he'd be on a lunar cycle. Drivers for men's hormones are women, light, food, stress, which would be fighting. They're drivers. Yeah. Men don't have cycles on their own without those drivers.
Right. So let's move on to, I guess, PMS. PMS symptoms, do you think they're avoidable?
Well, we laugh and call it UMS, ugly mood swings here in America. But, that kind of depression, that kind of irritability, and some women even feel physical effects, headaches, bloating, all kinds of things. That's all avoidable. That's when you don't have enough progesterone.
Right.
So it goes down a cortisol receptor and you retain water and you have a headache. And, it doesn't have to be like that. We don't see a lot of PMS on the protocol.
Yeah.
If we do, we fix it.
Right.
I wrote a 450-page clinical practice guidelines manual for doctors that has 20 symptoms that can be fixed by 5 small changes to the dosing.
Right. So I guess what's the youngest age that someone would go on the Wiley protocol?
Well, we have 350 doctors here in 97 pharmacies, and doctors report that they've got people from 16 to 96 on it. And the 96-year-olds are having normal periods.
Wow. Jeez. So I guess, do you think things like environmental estrogens affects women developing menopause earlier in life, say in their 30s, or do you really think it's more of a food and light issue?
I think it's food and light. I think that women, and it's non-reproduction. You got to remember, in the real world, reproducing shortly after you're capable, and if that were 17 at the turn of the century, right now it's 8 or 10, so that's not good for anybody. But if you reproduce by the time you're 18, all sorts of things change. P53, which is a gene that's permanently upregulated that avoids cancer, not reproducing means that women use up their eggs much, much faster than they normally would. In other words, when you are pregnant, you don't ovulate. When you breastfeed for 3-4 years at a time, you don't ovulate. But if you ovulate every month, you're losing 150 eggs a month.
Right.
And that makes you run out faster.
Right. Gotcha. So I guess there's a lot of talk again in natural medicine. What are your thoughts on supplements to support menopausal symptoms?
I don't know. I mean, if you can't get hormones, I suppose there's a potential, but in reality, all those supplements do is work across hormone receptors if they work at all. And if you're not going to make a normal cycle and try to dose them, and God knows what amount that would be, it's not really useful. Right now, there was a new study that just came out showing that they found in the bloodstream of people active microRNA. That's not human, it's from plants. So plants are alive, and you eat those plants, and you molecularly deconstruct them, and that's called food. Taking pills, whether it's herbal or it's food supplements or it's minerals, is not the same. It doesn't affect your body the same way eating does. So it's this third thing, and I think that on its own can cause problems.
Right. So you actually think not only then they might not be helpful, but they can actually cause problems?
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
I don't think doctors know how to dose them.
Right.
Or Chinese medicine, herbal medicine works for Chinese people and Indian people, but we did not evolve in the same way, so I don't think it's the same medicine.
Yeah, a lot of talk. I guess there's a lot of talk about things like magnesium. Have you even that's true? I guess for things like magnesium, that could be harmful.
No, actually, magnesium is a mineral.
Yeah.
Things like magnesium and zinc tend to occur in the food supply in different kinds of cycles. So you would eat zinc, of course, when you can get a lot of shellfish. But magnesium seems to be something people are very short on in most cultures because we don't eat as many nuts as we used to. There's a lot of magnesium in nuts. And magnesium slows firing, calms people down. I think it's got a lot of benefit.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess supplements to support things like PCOS or PMS symptoms. Learning from some of my teachers, they've spoken about PMS symptoms. You can give people like magnesium, things like B6, B9, B12, and maybe some even good gut bacteria. Is there any I guess, value?
Well, what you're describing with magnesium and B12, all of the B vitamins are just like taking amphetamines. They sit on the edge of the estrogen receptor and blow it wide open. So if you're short on estrogen and you're having PMS symptoms and you can't use your progesterone in the normal way, it's logical that B vitamins might make you feel better. The magnesium, of course, calms you down, and it slows down the uterus from contracting, and it does all kinds of things like that. But you also, what else did you mention? Magnesium, B6?
Basically, gut flora, like
I'm not sure.
Probiotics.
Oh, probiotics.
Yeah.
Well, probiotics are always good for people, but the problem is if you don't have enough hormones and you're not young and you put those probiotics in there, they love hormones. So they're going to die. You can put them in every day, but they don't take hold, they don't live, and they won't stay. For example, many women have diarrhea when they have a period. Well, that's because their estrogen drops, and the bacteria in their stomach are looking for a new host. So they leave, okay? So you can't really support another life form like bacteria or 450 kinds of bacteria unless you've got hormones on board because they want to productive. They want more, apartment buildings, more houses, more condos for their own kind, and that would be other human beings. So unless you're reproductive, you're not of much use to them. And that's why most of the elderly have gastric problems and need probiotics. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. I guess so to really sum it up, you need to really give back the hormones.
Yeah. It's the beginning. You got to get people to. That's what I wrote in the lights out, and you can't get them to sleep when they're old with no hormones. I mean, you have to make some attempt to turn the lights out and lay down, but most old people really just can't sleep. They can't stay asleep all night. They wander around like the living elderly and they have to pee all night. That's kind of a nightmare. So once you get more hormones and they can sleep, suddenly they get much better. They make more growth hormone. Their cognitive ability is better. Their memory is better. They don't feel so badly. So they're so intertwined, the hormones and the sleeping, that one without the other doesn't really solve the problem.
Right, right. So, I mean, you said I was watching one of your YouTube videos, you said that a hot flush can turn into breast cancer. Can you explain this?
When you can't maintain your own body temperature crossing the room from wherever you were sitting to the door, it's the beginning of dying. Homeostasis, being in a homeostatic condition where you can respond to the environment, whether it's hot or cold out or whatever, is a basic, necessity to stay alive, like breathing. And a hot flush means your central nervous system is deranged, and all the blood has come to the surface of your skin to cool you off because you can't maintain an internal thermometer. And that's when you lose your estrogen. When receptors fluctuate. So I would tell you the beginnings of breast cancer can easily just be a hot flash.
Right. Right. So in functional medicine, there's an axiom or saying that menstruation is tears of a disappointed uterus. I guess with that said, what are some steps or actions that women who have pretty bad PMS or very heavy menses, what can they do?
Well, if they go to the doctor, a doctor is either going to give them surgery and throw away the evidence of dysfunction, or they're going to give them birth control pills and try to reprogram the software the same way I do. But the difference is I reprogram the software with natural hormones in a natural rhythm that can be identified in nature. Birth control pills look more like a bad TV screen. And, of course, throwing away a body part never solves the problem, because what was happening in your uterus is happening in your breasts. And those breast ducts aren't growing, dying, cleaning, and rehabbing every month the same way your uterus wasn't. And that, again, is the beginning of breast cancer.
All right. So I guess you touched on progesterone, and obviously there's a lot of probably listeners who do take birth control pills. Can you speak a little bit about progesterone and why is it so important?
Well, birth control pills are progestins, and that means they're drugs with hormone-like effects. They put the side group on the molecule. That's why they're called progestins, not progesterone. And what happens is that the progestins in the birth control pills are married with androgens, fake androgens. Things like norethindrone and norgestimate are more like testosterone than estrogen. And those things have no place in the body. There are no receptors for any of those that make any sense. So it's like birds on the bottom of the ocean. What do you do with that? And it's never good. Sometimes they'll stick in receptors too long. Women have terrible headaches, or they get, blood clots. There are just so many things that can happen on birth control pills.
Right, right. So I guess another thing with menopause, one of my teachers taught me that there's basically 4 different types of menopause. He basically referred to it as the H type being the bloating type, the D type, the depressed type, the C type, the carb craving type, and the A type being anxiety type. Well, whatever the typings are, these typings, do you, I guess, prescribe to this kind of methodology, or is that completely, I guess, off the chart of what you do?
We don't really divide women into types. Obviously morphology matters in terms of very thin women can't hold much transdermal hormone. They don't have a fat base. So sometimes they need dosing 3 times a day. But other than that, what we do is it's not one size fits all, but it's one size starts all. So everybody starts on the Wiley protocol at the basic level, and then we watch them for a month or 2 and see if they need more. So there's +2, more lines, morning and night, and estrogen. We get the estrogen curve right first, and the progesterone curve we leave alone until we're sure that we're having a normal period. And most women end up at 70%, I think, take 2 more lines, morning and night, than the basic. But a lot of people really benefit from a midday dose. And, we just put everybody back to girls, and then we figure out what kind of girl you were.
Right, right. So again, in another video that I was watching of you giving a talk, you said give back the progesterone, give back the estrogen, and then, if needed, give back the Cortef. What role does cortisol have in menopause?
Well, what happens is, we talked about cycles. There's a 28-day cycle, 13 in a year. Those are lunar cycles. And, of course, a year is one trip around the sun. And a day is one revolution. In other words, the Earth revolves and in and out of the light. Now, when it's in the light, cortisol peaks 4 times a day, once before dawn and 4 times after that, in between dawn and dusk. Every time cortisol peaks, it releases estrogen, testosterone, and thyroid from binding globulins. And it also mobilizes blood sugar, which provokes insulin, which makes an estrogen receptor, an androgen receptor, and a thyroid receptor. So what happens is, peaks in the morning, you have a flood of hormones and blood sugar, then insulin comes along, disperses that blood sugar, makes you some receptors. All those hormones go into the receptors, and what's left over at the bottom when that peak drops is bound up again till the next peak, and that happens 4 times a day. So once somebody's on estrogen and progesterone, if we can't make them really comfortable, we can give them cortisol, which will more finally granulate the normalization of catch and release in a day versus a month.
Right. Yeah, for sure. So I guess what we're going to switch now to is I've got a number of Facebook questions from the readers and listeners. So the first Facebook question I have is, a lot of females talk about being estrogen dominance or estrogen dominant. What does this really mean?
Well, an old friend of mine named John Lee wrote a book called What Your Doctor Won't Tell You About Menopause. And he talked about estrogen dominance. Now, John didn't mean anyone ever had too much estrogen. He used that term to explain to explain no progesterone. So what that means is you've got some dribbling estrogen, not from ripening eggs, probably from a fat base or conversion from testosterone, but you don't have enough to make a peak, so you never have any progesterone. You can't ovulate anymore. So that's called estrogen dominance. That's all you have is this little bit of estrogen.
So it's without the progesterone.
Right, and most people think it means you have more estrogen than progesterone. Well, you do, but you don't have enough estrogen, or you would have progesterone. That's how it works. If you have enough estrogen to peak, then you pop, then you have progesterone. So when you run out of progesterone, you had to run out of estrogen first, actually.
Yeah, that makes sense. Next Facebook question is, what can be some of the causes for periods that stop and start?
Oh, that stop and start. Yeah. Well, usually, if you're having a normal cycle, you'll have a 5-day period with one heavy day because the uterus looks like a balloon with 4 hash marks in it. So you've got the fundus, the top curve, and that falls. And when the 2 sides fall, that's the heavy day 2 or 3, and then the 2 bottom sides, and they're smaller, are 4 and 5, and that's a normal period. But if you get a period that starts, and then it stops, and then it starts again, it can be anything from fibroids creating an uneven landscape, so the blood can't really get out. It's stuck behind a fibroid tumor, and then it'll come out later. Or it can just be you didn't build a good enough lining and you didn't shed the whole thing last time. You can actually get, how did you skin your knee and you get a scab on your knee? In your uterus, you can actually have a patch where you've got dried blood, old blood. Sometimes it's brown, and it'll start and stop and be brown because the lining is not normalized. It's not vascularized, and it's not growing a normal lining.
Right. So there's a few reasons, but I guess for this particular listener, what are some steps that they can do? What would you advise them? Go to a normal doctor or get on the Wiley protocol?
Well, yeah. When you take hormones, bioidentical hormones, normally, when we make you a big estrogen peak and a progesterone peak, after 2-3 months, your uterus is brand new. inside again, and you have normal periods, and you feel fine.
Right. So
you want to get rid of those old cells that didn't shed because they're the ones that cause problems, like uterine cancer.
Yeah, and I guess, is this also kind of related to things like PCOS as well?
Yeah, PCOS is actually an insulin disorder. PCOS is when you have bubble polycystic ovarian syndrome. It used to be called a disease, now it's called a syndrome. It's when you quite literally try to pop too many eggs. So you have LH, luteinizing hormone, pouring all the time. And instead of ripening 150 eggs, and there's one really good one, which is normal, and you pop that egg, maybe you use it, maybe you don't, you start popping a whole bunch of eggs. So your ovaries look like they have bubble wrap on them. And that happens when your insulin and your blood sugar are too high, because that much food supply makes you hyperovulate. And that hyperovulation is a negative feedback loop to stop you from reproducing. Because if you can use the food that well, you would outpopulate everybody else. And nature has checks and balances. So when you eat too much, you tend to have polycystic ovarian disease. You often have high blood sugar and high testosterone and don't really ovulate.
So I guess with something like PCOS, one of the protocols along with, I guess, giving back the hormones would be to sleep 9 to 8 hours a night, uninterrupted, and to low carbohydrate, high protein, high fat diet?
That would make a huge difference. And even there's a drug called metformin or glucophage. I don't know what you call it in Australia. But it's really French white lilac bark. It's more of a botanical. And it lowers blood sugar in about 24 different synergistic ways. And what that means is it empties your liver of blood sugar so that your circulating blood sugar has somewhere to go. And then your insulin resistance, your receptors can come back up. And once they come back up, you can use your blood sugar again, you normalize, you lose weight, and you don't make as many androgens. You don't make as much testosterone, which is a big part of PCOS.
So with something like metformin, you wouldn't take it long-term, though? It would be a very short-term thing?
Well, it usually takes 3 to 6 months to show a real good effect in PCOS. And then after that, by then people have lost 20 pounds, and everything changes. Without that extra fat supply, they aren't as insulin resistant. They have something called 21-hydroxylase. It's an enzyme that takes O-hydroxyprogesterone to cortisol. And when 21-hydroxylase is missing, O-hydroxyprogesterone turns into testosterone, which tries to turn into estrogen, but it can't do it without an enzyme called aromatase. And you make that in your fat base. So the fatter you get, the fatter you need to get to make hormones. And that's when you stop reproducing. That's PCOS.
Yeah. So one of the most common questions I got asked by a fair few of my readers and listeners is women who get really tired before their menses. Is there any remedies to this, and why does it happen?
Tired fatigue is pretty normal. In most cultures, there's a menstrual hut. There's a place where women can go and have a period and kind of relax together. In our world, that's not accounted for. So the only thing you can really do, the fatigue is from progesterone. Progesterone is a soporific. And after you've ovulated, the progesterone that's left in your system can make you sleepy, like early pregnancy. So women who are tired are actually producing more progesterone at the end of their cycle than others. But they can, best thing you do, take a nap, cup of coffee. I mean, you're not going to die from it, but it's exhausting. And it's that kind of exhaustion in pregnancy where you just can't keep your eyes open.
Right. Cool. And this is one of... Sorry, you were going to say something else?
I'm sorry, say it again.
Oh, no, I was just about to say, I guess this one here is kind of one of my questions. I've been learning this and trying to get my head around it. But have you ever heard of something... Can you please explain the relationship between, I guess, E2 OH, which is kind of classified as the good, E4OH, which is kind of classified as the bad, and E16. Are you familiar with those, and what do they really mean?
Yes, what you're talking about is 2, 4, and 16.
Yeah.
Those are metabolites of estrogen, not just E2. But those metabolites of estrogen occur depending on how E1 to E2 can spin backwards. So we can have estrone, which becomes estradiol and goes back to estrone and back to estradiol. And you can see the spin happening before it becomes E3 and goes out of the body. E3, estriol, is the spent metabolite. However, how the velocity and the amplitude at which estrogen's rhythms approach the liver tell the liver what enzymes to make. And in normal functioning rhythms of estrogen and progesterone, you don't see any sort of disparity between the ratios of 2, 4, and 16. We had 380 women, and the doctor watched them, and they all had perfectly normal ratios on the Wiley protocol. But when you give somebody a static dose, or their hormones are falling off, the liver isn't making the right enzymes, and then 2, 4, and 16 have ratios that are more or less predictive of potential cancer.
Right. Right. So it's all about, I guess, having it in the right ratios, not just,
Yeah.
Because some people say, 16 is constantly elevated and it's the ugly one, and we want to minimize that. It's not necessarily true.
No. They looked at a study by a woman named Eleanor Rogan, and in that study, she looked at very sick women and looked at their ratios, and they were very old women. Nobody ever looked at what they're supposed to be in somebody young and healthy and how they change seasonally. And there are too many variables missing for Eleanor Rogan's work to be valid. So what we saw was if estrogen approaches the liver in quantities and in a timing that is normal, the liver puts out the right enzymes and everything turns out okay.
Right. Yeah, that's very interesting. And where can this question's for me. Where can I go? But apart from Sex Lies and Menopause, is there anywhere else that has some really good information on this?
Well, you can read some of the studies in the back of Sex Lies and Menopause if you are so disposed to read science in that way. You can go to the WileyProtocol.com, and we have lots of information, and we have a helpline, and we have what we call Hook Up a Sister. We find you a doctor. We have a wonderful doctor in Australia named Robin Wilcourt, and he has a lot of Wiley Protocol people. I just saw him at this conference that I'm at, and I love to see Robin. And I occasionally give lectures in Melbourne and Sydney. So I come to Australia. I love it there. And we're doing our best to spread the word. We have 2 pharmacies. We have one called Nima. Nima's in Melbourne, and another one, Field. And you can go to them. They have doctors who are prescribing, and we'll help you get some hormones.
Great. That's fantastic. So I guess what are your final thoughts?
My final thoughts are that life has an implicative order. In other words, it's implied how the world works. When you should have babies, when you should sleep, when you should eat. Those are all instincts. I know I'm hungry. I know I'm tired. I know I'm in love. And when you lose those instincts, you go extinct. And people are so cut off at this point from the real world. There's light all night, light after dark. I have to explain to people that when they don't go to bed by midnight, that's the next day. They didn't sleep at all one day. And that you come into this world with so many hormones for daytime and nighttime, and taking 2 days to one, you're going to run out sooner. And I think there's very logical, obvious things you see, certainly in nature and in animals, that all apply to human beings. That if there's no free lunch, there's probably no free love. Birth control pills are probably not the way to go. That, it'd be nice to be a man, a lot of freedom to that, but in this life, biology is destiny. And you're in a woman's body. And when you don't reproduce, when you don't breastfeed, you get problems.
Yeah, definitely. So the best place for people to get in contact with you is the Wiley protocol?
Yes, TS at the Wiley protocol, and it comes straight to me.
Cool, no problem. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show today. It's been an absolute pleasure. You've definitely imparted some great knowledge today that I'm sure the listeners will get a lot of value out of. So thank you, and have a great night.
Oh, no, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, no worries. Well, all the best, TS, and definitely keep up your great work, and look forward to seeing you.
I'll find you. Yeah, I'll find you when I come.
Yeah,
okay.
That'd be great. No worries.
Okay.
Speak to you soon.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
So there it is, guys, the interview with T.S. Wiley. Check out her great book, Lights Out, and Sex, Lies, and Menopause. T.S. talking about some really, really interesting stuff all to do with hormones. And if you want to go to a website, the website is www.thewileyprotocol.com. And if you want more podcasts with T.S. Wiley, you can also check out Sean Croxton's radio show, which is Underground Wellness Radio. That's very good, very, very, very good radio show. So definitely check that out, because he did 2 podcasts with TS, and they are really, really, really good. So till I speak to you next time, guys, you can go to www.maximusmark.com/radio to download more great podcasts just like this one. And always remember to train hard, eat well, and supplement smart.